Good afternoon. Thank you for those joining us this afternoon. I just wanted to introduce myself. For you, those of you that don't know me, my name is Karen Hum and I'm the Manager of Membership Services. Also on the call with us today is our Executive Director, Jordan Abney, and our Manager of Sport, Brianne White. Today, I'll be walking you through the basic eligibility requirements as well as student transfers. We will look at the various eligibility forms and the situations in which you should use each form. There will be an opportunity for you to ask questions throughout the session, but we ask that your questions are not related to a past ruling or specific student, but rather questions that will benefit all of those in attendance. We're happy to discuss specific student questions directly with you at any other time. Okay, so let's get started. So the first thing we're going to look at is the basic eligibility requirements. So there's 5 key eligibility criteria. So the first one is age eligibility, years of eligibility, full-time student status. A student must compete for the school they attend, and a student must meet residency requirements. So we're just going to walk through each of those individually here. The first one being age eligibility. The first one being age eligibility. So a student athlete must be under the age of 19 years of age as of December 31st of the current school year. So if we look at the 2021 school year that's approaching us, a student born in 2002 or later would be age eligible, but they must have started grade 8 for the first time in 2016 or later. So we'll look at a basic age chart here. So we always have a 1-year variance. So typically a student that is born in 2003 next year would be in grade 12 and entered grade 8 in 2016. We would allow a student born in 2002 to participate, provided that they started grade 8 in 2016 for the first time. So there is that 1-year variance, but the key factor is their grade 8 entry date. Does anybody have any questions with regards to that? Okay, then what we'll do is we'll move on to the exceptions. So there are a few exceptions to this rule. First off, a student gets 5 years of consecutive BCSS competition eligibility starting at their entry date into grade 8. If a student chooses not to participate during 1 or more of those years or leave schools for a time period, that 5 years of eligibility continues. It still counts towards their 5 years. So the only time there's an extension to the 5 years is you can look at a 6th year of eligibility. That would be related to loss of school for a medical reason. So you would have to submit an eligibility application for a 6th year under those conditions. The other exception to the 5 years is a grade 7 student that participates. So if a grade 7 student, an application is submitted for a grade 7 student to play on a grade 8 team, that year that they participate as a grade 7 student does not count towards their 5 years of eligibility. We'll look at that specific situation and how you go about submitting an application for that a little later on. And then the final one is a returning exchange student. So if a BC student athlete who is returning to BC after the conclusion of a 1-year or less ongoing student exchange program and has concluded their eligibility calendar, they may have up to 1 year of eligibility restored if all the conditions are met. So essentially the conditions would be they're not eligible to participate in sanctioned BCSS activity while they're away. So we would be looking for a letter from the school administrator to confirm that they're in compliance with the conditions outlined in the policy. Does anybody have any questions with regards to that?
Sorry, can I just clarify, Karen, with that returning exchange student, sorry, you said students, they can't participate when they're on exchange, like in a sports program?
That's correct. They cannot have participated in a BC sanctioned sport, BC school sanctioned sport, while they're on the exchange program.
Could they have participated in sports that are sanctioned wherever they are just like an international student would participate in our BC school sports?
So if it's not the same sport and they're not applying for a sport that they played while they're away, then yes.
Okay, so
if it's a sport that BC School Sports doesn't offer, and then they're coming back, that is not counted.
But if they play a sport that we have and then try and come back and play, that counts as one of their years of play.
It does, yes.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Great question. So the next item we're going to look at is full-time student status. So a student athlete must be enrolled and attending a minimum of 62.5% course load. So 100% course load is defined as 32 credits or 8 standard courses. So we break it down. If it was a linear school system, they must be attending a minimum of 5 full-time courses, 20 credits within the school year to be eligible. And if it's a semester school system, the student must be enrolled in and attending a minimum of 2 full-time courses, 8 credits in both semesters, or a minimum of 5 courses in total within the school year to be eligible. The exceptions to this, so if a student who has completes their graduation requirements by mid-year, so if it's a semester school, and doesn't continue to enroll in courses, they have to have been enrolled in a minimum of 3 courses in the first semester to remain eligible for the conclusion of the winter season of play. So if they started the winter season of play, they were enrolled in 3 courses in the first semester, they can finish out the winter season of play, but they're not eligible to play the spring season of play. Does anybody have any questions with regards to that? No? Okay. The next thing we'll move on to then is students competing for the school they attend. So there's a lot of myths out there that if a school doesn't offer a particular sport that they can play for another school. So a student is only able to, oops, I think I lost, sorry. So they can only play for the school they attend. The only exception to that would be if a student is a distributed learning or alternate school student, they can apply to play team sports at a previously established home school, or if they haven't previously established a home school, they can compete for a school whose catchment area they reside. The other exception to there is if they're cross-enrolled at schools, they're going to compete for the school in which they have the greater credit load. And if it's an equal credit load, it would resort back to the school that they first where they first established a home school. So that's sort of there's a lot of kids now that do cross-enroll for specific programs and so forth. So there's a lot of gray area in those. If you ever have one, it's best to send us a student's PR card and we'll look at it and help you determine where their eligibility lies. The other exception here is a student could potentially play for another school if the 2 schools came together and submitted a joint team application. So we'll look at the joint team application a little farther on in the presentation. Does anybody have any questions with regards to that? Okay. So the next one is the residency requirements. So a student must fulfill one of the following residency requirements in order to be eligible for competition in a BCSS activity. So they either need to reside with a parent, reside with the legal guardianship, and the guardianship must have been in place for 12 months prior to the period for which they're seeking eligibility. They must be a ward of the province by the Ministry of Children, determined by the Ministry of Children and Family Development, or they must be attending a BCSS member school as a residing full-time boarding student, or they must be attending a BCSS member school as an international exchange student and be recognized by the district board or independent school office as such. If they are attending as an international or exchange student, they must be here for a minimum of 5 months to be eligible. So one of the things that I think that I have to stress is that any student, regardless if they're in grade 8, grade 9, first year of eligibility, they still have to meet the residency requirement. One thing that we find, there's a lot of academy programs. So a student, for instance, might move away from home to attend a hockey academy, and they're being billeted. So they're not meeting the residency requirements outlined in the policy. So they are not eligible to play any sports because of that. We do have an exception in place where if a student maintains the same residency for a full 12 months, so they're with the same family, the same address, a school can provide proof of that and a letter of the administrator confirming that they're in compliance with that. So after a year, 12 months in that same residency, then they can seek eligibility. Does anybody have any questions about that?
Karen, we have a growing number of international students at our school who are coming for cultural exchanges, and they'll be there for maybe 3 or 4 months. Is there any opportunity for those kids to participate in sport? I know last season we had about 4 or 5 that I had to say, sorry, you can't play because you're not here for 5 months. Is there any way for them to be able to participate in competition?
Not in competition. Remember that the rules as they're established by our membership, we at BC School Sports don't have the ability or discretion to amend those rules. So they could practice with the team, but would not be eligible for any competition based on that rule. They don't meet the 5 months. Does anybody else have any other questions regards to that? Okay, so we've gone over the basic eligibility requirements, the 5 key areas. So a couple recommendations I might have as an athletic director. So when a student, I'm not sure if schools have an athletic form that they have the students when they first sign up for sports complete, but to make sure that the students are complying with all the residency requirements, the age and so forth, full-time student status, you might have them complete a form asking where they reside, where they're residing. We're touching base with counselors or administrators throughout the year if there's been any change in that student's course load, so that as an athletic director, you're informed about your athletes and you know that they're eligible and that there's not going to be any problems moving forward. So if you have a form in place that you have them at the beginning of the year or when they're going to play a sport, sign, maybe they send home to their parents, maybe those things should be added in there or some questions. And if you ever have any questions regarding that and how to formulate that form, by all means reach out to us. We can give you some suggestions on the questions that perhaps could be added to that form just to ensure that that you're meeting all the requirements in terms of eligibility for your students. Okay, so we're going to move forward to establishing a student athlete's homeschool. So a student athlete establishes their homeschool on the first day of their second year of eligibility. So grade 9, on the first day of grade 9, that's when they've established their homeschool in terms of athletic eligibility. The other way that they potentially are establishing their homeschool, so if a student athlete is attending a middle or junior school and they have a feeder senior school and they apply to play up to that senior team, and they're listed on a grade 9 junior or senior team at the more senior school, by doing so, they have then established their homeschool for athletics. So there's not a lot of those that happen anymore, middle schools and so forth, very in smaller communities, but if they play up to that more senior school, that is their homeschool for athletics. And if they choose not to go to that school, they are then subject to transfer rules as well. Does anybody have any questions at this point? Okay, we're going to move forward. So transferring after a student has established their homeschool. So a student athlete who transfers after a homeschool has been established is ineligible for a 12 months from the date of transfer in any BCSS activity which he or she was registered for the previous 12 months, unless one of the transfer conditions is satisfied. So we're going to go through the different transfer conditions. So to submit a transfer request, you're going to have to submit one of the forms. So I just want to go through the process before we go through the individual forms. So hopefully you're all familiar where our forms are located. They're on our website under the Forms tab. It's important that the applications, all the forms and applications are coming from the athletic director of record at the school. They shouldn't be submitted by parents. We are going to provide our rulings back to the athletic director of record, and it's their responsibility to let the student and or coaches know about the outcome of the application. All forms should come to info@bcschoolsports.ca. And as I said, also if the application is requiring supplementary documentation, we ask that everything come together in one package to be considered. If you're sending things in after the fact, due to volumes, it might not get into the right application folder, and or a ruling might have already started to be made without that information. So we only provide the ruling once. So it's important that you're including all the documentation at the time that the application is submitted. Okay, so we're going to start walking you through the different forms and the scenario in which you should use them. So the first form is the grade 8-9 transfer form. So you're going to use this form for a student athlete changing schools after grade 8 for their first day of grade 9. So this form can only be used if the student is in grade 9. So I'll just give you a view of the form here. You can put multiple students on here too. So, but the key is I have some schools, what they'll do is they'll like, oh, well, the student transferred in grade 9 to our school. They just didn't play sports in that year. So they're submitting it when they're in grade 10 or 11. It can only be used when they're in grade 9 and they're transferring for the first day. And when I say first day, I mean the first week, that kind of stuff. But if they went to another school and then in their first week of grade 9 and then ended up transferring to your school, you cannot use that form in this case. Does anybody have any questions regarding that? Okay. So the next one we're going to move on to is the compliance and authorization form. So by submitting this form, it's in a case where a student is transferred after the first day of grade 9 and they haven't changed their principal address. So essentially, we just decided we want to go to a different school and they are not going to be eligible by submitting this form for any sports that they played in the prior 12 months at their previous school. Sometimes what will happen is the student, the previous school will put the student on a roster and they didn't participate. We're going to be using the information that is on the form in conjunction with our STARS rosters. So if there's a discrepancy in that and the student says, but I didn't play, we're going to need a letter from the previous school athletic director and administrator confirming that that student did not participate in any competition on that team before we'll remove them from the roster. Can't just be an email, we want a letter that's signed off by the two of those. The other item of note on a compliance and authorization, a student can't, say a semester type school, they can't go to one school in term 1 and then transfer, using a compliance and authorization and then transferring to another school in the second term. They can't go back and forth using the compliance and authorization. We've had cases where one school has one sport and one school has another sport. So they're going to play, at one school A, they're going to play football in the fall. And then in term B, they're going to play basketball at the other school. One compliance and authorization form can be submitted in an academic year. So if they're going to go back to the other school, it would need to be an eligibility application submitted at that time. Does anybody have any questions regarding the compliance and authorization form or anything surrounding that particular rule? No. The other thing I just wanted to make note of, this causes quite a bit of confusion. The receiving school, you are the receiving school when you're submitting the form. So that's the school that the student is currently at. The other thing on this particular form, you'll make note that we've asked about the residency. So you're confirming that the student meets residency requirement by completing that form. So the next form we're going to move on to is the school declaration form. So this form would be submitted when a student has changed their principal residence in a couple different cases. You can use the same form if they're changing residence with their parent or legal guardians within the last 12 months. Or if they're moving to live from one parent to another. So if there's a parents aren't living together. The key here too is that the move had to have been within the last 12 months. So they couldn't have decided that they were going to stay at their other school for a year and a half, and now, you know what, they want to move. They want to go back to the catchment school now that they live in. It has to be within the last 12 months to use this particular form. Are there any questions regarding the use of this form? A couple notes on this form too. So if a school declaration is denied, you can appeal that ruling. So this is one of the forms, this and the eligibility form, that you can submit an appeal. You don't have to go from school declaration to eligibility to appeal. You can go straight from a declined school declaration ruling to an appeal.
And just to clarify, Karen, they still have to sit out 12 months with any registered sport?
So if this application, if a school declaration is submitted and it meets the standard of the rule, they would be eligible, fully eligible for all sports.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. So just to look at the form, it's important that it's completed in full. Your school administrator is signing it, indicating that, you know, they're aware that they're submitting this, the student didn't move for the purpose of sport, and that, you know, if we're asking for, it's always helpful too if you can provide one of the required documents in here, because then our eligibility officer is not going to come back to you and ask for it. So if it's all submitted at once, it'll make the processing of the form a lot faster and more efficient. Once the application has been adjudicated, you will get an email from our eligibility officer to let you know the outcome of the rule. The next form we're going to move on to is our eligibility application. So if you've exhausted all other FUs, the student hasn't moved, and they want to become eligible in a sport they did play in the prior 12 months, you will be submitting an eligibility application. But in order to submit one, it has to qualify or be worthy of submitting under one of the following categories. So a bona fide academic transfer. So the definition of that is 3 or more courses in a related program of study not available at the prior school. And then the other one would be a financial hardship. So if the family has suffered, or there's been a change in the family's financial viability within the last 12 to 18 months, that needs to be demonstrated. It required them to change schools. And one of the more common one, you can't, if a student was attending an independent school paying fees and now all of a sudden just doesn't want to pay the fees, that is not a reason for transfer. They have to demonstrate that those fees are no longer, you know, feasible for the family due to a change in their financial status. And then the next one is bullying. So there's a long definition of that. We're looking for the leaving school to also acknowledge that they were aware that there was a situation that fell within the definition of bullying to submit that application. So that's one of the required documents that needs to come with it. And then the one that we talked about earlier, the 6th year. So a student is applying for a 6th year of eligibility because they lost a significant or a portion of a school year due to a medical or health reason. Once again, there's going to have to be demonstration that, and for instance, a copy of a personal record card that would show the attendance record, also some doctor's notes and so forth to indicate that the student wasn't able to attend school. And then the final one will just be for this year right now. So we have an exception that we're adding to because of COVID-19 in the spring season of play being lost. So if any student that is eligible by age next year, they would be able to apply to play the spring season of play as a 6th year just for the spring season due to the loss of this season. But they'd have to be attending, they'd have to meet all the other eligibility requirements, attending school on a full-time basis, age eligibility, and all of those to apply for that COVID spring season of play. The other avenues here, there's a $50 non-refundable application fee. We will invoice the school. We do not want parent checks. So You're our members. We invoice you if the arrangement is that you're asking the students to, the student or family to pay for the filing. That's between you and the student and the parent. So we don't want any parent checks. And the fee, there's a lot of misconception that the fee has to be sent to us before we'll review the application. All the applications come to us by email. We will invoice you once we've ruled on the application for the application fee. The other item of note is a school can only submit an eligibility application or a school declaration once for each student per academic school year. So you can't sort of switch up the reasons, say, oh, they moved, it didn't meet that, so now we're going to go this way. And the denied eligibility application submission may be appealed. Does anybody have any questions about the eligibility application? Okay, we're just looking at the application fee here, and there's a list. Is this what I was talking about when you submit the application? All of these documents are what we're looking for. So if it all can be submitted together in one package, in one email, otherwise it's going to go off to our eligibility officer. And if we get things that straggle in after the fact, he or she might have already made a ruling on the application, or it might get separated. So it's very important that it all come in together. The other item of note, so if you submit an eligibility application and it doesn't get approved for the sports they're applying for an exemption, that would still serve as a compliance and authorization form. So assuming that they're eligible in all other areas, we would make them eligible for the sports that they didn't play in the prior 12 months. Next one, moving on to, is our eligibility appeal. So should a member school decide to appeal a denied eligibility ruling or a school declaration, they can do so. We have 9 scheduled appeal meetings per year, roughly 3 per season of play. The submission deadline is 2 p.m. on the Tuesday before the scheduled meeting. So what we do is, if you choose to appeal a ruling, any information that was sent to us in the first application, the school declaration or the eligibility application, that is already going to be put forth to the appeal. So you can just submit the appeal form and then any additional information that you wish to be included in the appeal. Also, just like the eligibility application, the application fees are going to be invoiced to the school. It's the responsibility of the school. The fee doesn't need to be sent to us at the time of application. Once the ruling has been made, we will send you an invoice for the appeal ruling fee. There's 2 different possible fees. So if it's denied, it's going to be $250. If it's approved, it's going to be $50. The other item of note there is that there is no right to a teleconference or oral hearing before the EAC. So our appeals committee is a member of 7 members from across the province. They're principals and athletic directors. So they meet on these dates, they review the applications, make their rulings. Now, our appeals committee has the ability, unlike our eligibility officer, to look at exceptions that aren't in policy. So our eligibility officer is set, can only look at policy and look at the application to see if it meets policy, cannot rule outside of that. Our appeals committee has the discretion to make exceptions that they feel are within the I guess, to continue to maintain my word here, maintain equitable play and so forth, and is still going to not create an imbalance. They can make rulings outside of that. So they have a little bit more discretion than our eligibility officer. So those rulings typically are sent out to the school on the Monday. And once again, the athletic director of record will receive the ruling, and it's their responsibility to inform the athlete, parents, and coach of the ruling. That's a look at the form. So I have last year's dates in here. We haven't posted this year's dates, but typically we try to do 2 in September. And so that understanding that if kids are looking to play a fall sport, we'll get them up and running as soon as possible. Does anybody have any questions about eligibility appeals? We're going to go on to grade 7 eligibility application. So a school that doesn't have enough grade 8 students to field a bantam team, and they have grade 7s as part of their school enrollment, can apply for grade 7s to play. There's a lot of rules around the use of grade 7s. So you can only use grade 7s if you're not using your grade 8s to play on a higher age team. You can't have more grade 7s on a team than you can grade 8s. And you can't exceed minimum numbers, with the exception of volleyball and basketball. There has been there was a change made last year by our membership to allow those sports to exceed minimum numbers for schools that are within a certain membership category that have a lower population. So as I mentioned earlier, if a grade 7 is approved to play, we would be BCSS staff would be manually adding them to the roster, and that year that they participate as a grade 7 is not going to count towards their 5 years of eligibility. Does anybody have any questions regarding the grade 7 application? Just have a quick look at it. So in addition to the application, we'd also be looking for a letter of support from the administrator with that application. So moving on to our jointly sponsored team. So this is another exception where we might have a student that's playing potentially for another school, but really what it is, it's a joint team application. So a couple of years back, this process kind of got streamlined a little but the goal was to allow more students to participate. So if we have a school that doesn't have sufficient numbers to have a team, 2 or more schools could come together and form a jointly sponsored team. However, to ensure that we're maintaining the competitive balance, there is a restrictor on the 2 schools that join with respect to their membership category. So the size of the school, which will determine if the team can participate in postseason play. So the application is always going to get approved. It'll be whether they can play postseason play or not. So if there's just a school that's wanting to get 2 schools that want to get a program up and running, like for instance, I a couple of years ago had 2 larger schools that hadn't had a rugby program in a while. They came together, had a jointly sponsored team, just played in league play for participation to get interest back in the sport, but couldn't do postseason play. So that's sort of the basis of that application. So that's what that application looks like. So one of the 2 schools needs to be the host school, and they register the team. BCSS will take the students from the other school and add them to your roster as an override with the approval of this application. Does anybody have any questions regarding the joint team application?
Karen, what's the requirement? On the previous slide there, you talked about 8 or lower could be eligible for postseason play. What does that mean? Like how would
each school has a membership category. So essentially the membership category is the number of students that are at your school. So it is in our handbook on page 16. So we'd be looking at the category codes of the 2 schools combined to determine if their enrollment together is at that threshold.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
So if you look, it probably would make more sense if you look at page 16 of our handbook. It outlines the membership fees and the categories of the different fees and the ranges of enrollment on each of those categories. Does anybody else have any questions on that? Okay, we'll move forward. So the next one is our distributed learning or alternate school. And I will say this is probably becoming more and more common. And I believe perhaps after this COVID-19 and the homeschooling, I had a few comments that parents are enjoying the homeschooling of their children. So students are typically registered through a distributed learning. And there's a good portion of those distributed learning schools that are members of BC School Sports. So a student that is attending a distributed learning school can apply to play a team sport at either a previously established home school or a catchment school. A couple key things here is that the distributed learning or alternate school does need to be a member of BC School Sports for that student to apply. The other thing I will say that the school who they're applying to play for is not obligated to allow that student to play. So if they have enough students at their own school that they're wanting to play a sport and they don't want that student taking a spot away from another, BCSS is not mandating they do it. I have had some principals express some concern that, you know, they don't even know who the student is, and if the student's going to be traveling with their team or doing things, is there an insurance or a liability concern? So that is totally a choice of the school and whether they want those students to be able to play. So that's sort of a key things here. So if a student was always doing homeschooling or distributed learning school, they wouldn't have established a homeschool for sports. So then they would be looking at their catchment school. If they did at one time go to what we call a brick and mortar school, and then all of a sudden their parents or the student decided that homeschooling was a better alternative, and they played sports where they were at that brick and mortar school, that's their sport, that's the school that they've established as their sports school. So they can't then just choose another school to play sports at based on, oh, that school's got this team and I want to play for them. The application, the rules are very, very tight around who they'd be eligible for. And for individual sports such as cross country, track and field, aquatics, mountain biking, they can participate for the distributed learning school, because it only takes one student to field the team. So it might be that they practice with the other school, but when it comes to participation in competition, they can participate for their own school under that. The only exceptions we ever see on that is in some cases, the distributed learning school might be in a zone, a different zone than they reside. And then there would be difficulties for them to qualify for zone or provincial championships without their parents having to travel to that zone to do the qualification. In those cases, we have allowed them to participate, for instance, in an individual track meet, but they can't participate in relay events for that school, just individual events when that exception is granted. Does anybody have any questions? There's a look at the form. Does anybody have any questions with regards to the distributed learning or alternate school form? The other thing of note, if you are submitting one of these on behalf of a student, you're signing it, and they're going to play more than one sport for you in a given year, all of the sports can be listed on the form, just making sure that the age, the level of sport as well. So for instance, we've got senior basketball, not just basketball, so we know what level to put them into. Okay, the next one we're going to move on to is our international students. So we receive a lot of these. I'm not sure how this is going to be next year with everything that's going on, but a couple of things that we've already touched bases on, the requirement for that student to be registered a minimum of 5 months or 1 semester to be eligible for BCSS competition. The other item of note that has caused a lot of confusion or issues is what level does an international student play in? So although a student might come here and be placed in a grade appropriate to their language, if English isn't their first language, that doesn't constitute their eligibility in terms of what level of sport they play. So we're looking at their age and their grade 8 entry date. And when we speak of grade 8 entry date, it wouldn't be their grade 8 entry date coming into Canada. So we're looking at when they started grade 8 in their home school. So they're receiving the same eligibility calendar as our regular students as well. So I know a lot that it's a big struggle sometimes. So the rules state if we can't determine when they started grade 8 in their home country, we're going to use the standard academic calendar and age formula to determine that. So they're going to play based on that. The other thing, they can't have graduated from their home country, then come here and still wanting to play sports. They could practice with the team for the experience, but they would not be eligible for competition. The other one is more and more, we've had international students that are here for, a couple years, and they choose to switch schools. So they're in one part of BC for 1 year, and then the next year they want to move to, say, the island. They're still going to be subject to transfer rules. So if they transfer to another school the following year, they're not going to be eligible for sports that they played in the prior 12 months unless there is, they're changing home, unless they've stayed with the same family, billet family, and that family moved and there's verification of that. That's the only time that they would be subject to not having to sit out that 12 months. So this is the international. We also use the same form for if they're a boarding student. So we're asking you if they're a boarding student. If they are a boarding student and they were in Canada, at a school in Canada in the prior 12 months, we will be sending you a compliance form or asking you to also complete the compliance and authorization form, because they, once again, will be subject to sit out in any sports that they played in the prior 12 months at the school that they attended in the prior year, in any BCSS activities. Does anybody have any questions regarding that? Okay, we're going to move on to the last and final form. So this is the middle junior school playing up form. A lot of people get this confused with the move up form. So the move up form is the one we use in STARS. If a student is registered on a lower age group team and you want to move them up to the more senior team, you would submit that form, but that student is registered at your school. This form is used in the case that you have a middle and junior school and you have a feeder senior school and you want that student to play for the feeder senior school, the more senior school. That is when this form is submitted. I mentioned a student declaring their home school. So this would be a case where this would apply. So if a student at the middle school wants to play up on the feeder school senior team, by doing so, they've now committed to that school as their home school for athletics. We have a couple exceptions here. We are allowing for football, students that are in grade 9 at their feeder school can play up to the JV team. There's a slight exception because we have some membership categories that also come and play with this one. So we're only allowing schools with middle feeder schools to do it if their membership category is 4 or lower. So essentially their population would be 350 or lower, and we feel that they don't have the student enrollment to fulfill a team. Larger schools that have feeder schools aren't able to use middle, except for kids from their feeder or middle school, with the exception of the football rule that I mentioned in here. So that's the only exception to that one. And I think that's the final eligibility form. So does anybody have any questions with regards to what we talked about or went over today?
Karen, it's Jordan. I just want to reiterate, I think the big thing that for athletic directors to take away is that the transfer rules specifically are a small portion of the eligibility rules. And the transfer rules really only come into effect once a kid is moving schools after the first day of grade 9, whereas the eligibility rules, those apply to all students all the time. And so that's where it's important for you to work with your administration, with your front office, and with your counseling teams to make sure that as an AD, you're being made aware of things that could affect student athlete eligibility when it comes to these things, because they often, whether it's the office, if it's a change of address, if it's a major change in course load, the counselors, that's the type of dialogue where you need to have the start of the year with those people saying, when these things happen, I need to be kept in the loop, because the eligibility is in effect all students all the time. And I think people sometimes overlook that and think it only applies during transfers, and that's why if you look in the handbook, the transfer section is different than the eligibility. There's eligibility, that's am I eligible to play? And then transfers is, okay, I'm switching schools. Now there's some additional things that have to happen, but that's only in a transfer setting. So I think that's just one of the biggest takeaways from this.
A good example would be, I mean, I had an athletic director that they run an IB program at their school. So they submitted transfer paperwork for one of their students who came to their school for IB. And then that athletic director later found out what that student did is once they received the transfer, they were now becoming eligible. That student then decided to withdraw from the IB program and just take regular courses. Once that athletic director found out, he realized that that student was no longer eligible, so they notified us. So those are things to keep keep in mind and so forth. But as I said at the beginning, I've gone back to the 5 key eligibility criteria here. And it might be wise as an athletic director when you have students signing up to play athletics at your school to maybe have a form if they're sending it home that kind of goes over some of the questions so that you know that they are living with their parents or want to meet one of the residency requirements so that you don't find out after they've already played and potentially cause your team to be ineligible. Does anybody have any questions?
Just one, guys. We've got a student transferring from another school where they played basketball next year. They know they're going to sit out a year. When do I apply for their eligibility for the following year? Do I do it now, going into the season where they're going to sit out, or do I wait until the start of that following year after they've sat out their year?
I would recommend that you submit the compliance and authorization form as soon as they become a student at your school, because then that's going to make them eligible for any sports they didn't play. And it also will set the transfer date for the 12 months. So once that 12 months has expired, it's then going to make them eligible for the sports they did play in the prior 12 months.
Thanks. That's a perfect answer. Makes total sense to me. Thank you.
It gets them in your system. They might play other sports, but then you don't have to think about it the following year. They're already going to be in your eligibility system and ready to be added to a roster.
Makes sense. Thank you.
Anybody else have any questions? Okay, well, thanks again for joining us.